Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Catholic OCD Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Nolfi. Today, we are joined in the studio by our Dominican priest of the day, Father Frassati. We're going to talk about his journey into being a priest and what it's like to be a Dominican priest in the year 2023. Stay tuned. That's the show today. So Father Frassati is in the house. This is Father Frassati.
Here I am.
Father Lewis is no longer with us. He has went to become a Carthusian monk.
God rest his soul. I mean, that's been our kind of monkey joke, is that he's gone off to the Carthusians to die, not only to self but to the world, and treating him as such. I said, I'll write him letters, but if I don't hear from you, then I'll assume you're doing just great. So
yeah, no news is good news, right?
It's that, yeah, that's the Carthusian way.
That's it. So Father Frassati has been at St. Dominic's parish, so you could see. I had to bust out my Dominican shield.
You got the swag on.
I got the swag on. You've been at our parish for what, like 4 months?
It's about 4 months, yeah. Going on the 4-month anniversary.
Nice. So let's just get right into it. How old are you?
Oof. Well, that's a personal question.
Well, it's a personal podcast.
Yeah, well, as I sit here like a frozen lamppost, I can say that I'm older than what most people think, but still too young for a lot of the average Catholics who think that I'm just like this newly ordained, right out of college priest. But I am 31.
31. I knew it was in the Jesus ministry.
I'm kind of getting into the ministry years.
Range.
Yeah, I'm really ramping up now.
So you got about another 2 years left, and then you're in trouble.
Yeah, well, my patron, Blessed Pure Georgia Frassati, died at 24, so I figured, after 24 years, if I can survive that, then the next milestone would be 33. So
the good ones die young.
Yeah, that's true.
St. Thomas was what, 40? I think he was young.
Yeah.
I'm 40.
Okay, well, you're probably going to outlive him. So, I mean, I don't know what
Maybe.
you've written, but
Not a lot. I write my wife a love note every once in a while. That's about it.
that's essentially what
And it says
what
P.S.
Thomas Aquinas did.
Yeah, P.S. You forgot to put lettuce on my sandwich.
Oh, yeah.
So how did you end up becoming this Dominican priest?
Well, to get personal on this personal podcast, it begins with the person, and that is the person of Jesus Christ. And to confirm your life to the life of Christ, to really conform yourself to love as Christ loves, there's many options for young Catholics to consider as they're discerning a vocation. And becoming a priest was really far from my ideal way of serving the Lord when I was in high school and then as I started college. But really the short answer is, as I really dove deep into that question of who is the person of Christ and how do I conform my life to the life of Christ, it became clearer and clearer to me that he was calling me to be his priest. And it's such a cliche thing, and I only use the term cliche because that's kind of the easy way to answer this question. How were you called to be a priest? And you just say, it's a calling. Not everybody receives it. And to make that free gift of self, to really know that your faith comes from the person of Jesus Christ and to give that back to him as a priest, really shows that this is not ultimately your decision. It was really Christ's decision to work in you in this particular way to become his priest. So that's the short answer. It's a calling. I felt that calling when I was in college, but of course it came from a pretty, I wouldn't say the word like complicated, but I come from a cradle Catholic family, and so it's always kind of been in the back as a possibility, but never something that I would have really chosen for myself until I started to ask that question: who is the person of Jesus Christ? How do I conform my life to his? And it really comes down to, how is he calling me to be happy?
Yeah. I was going to ask you, like, were you and you answered this about you were a cradle Catholic, which basically means, you were born into the Catholic faith, raised in the Catholic faith. Was your family like very religious in the Catholic faith? They weren't like the Creasters who went on Christmas and Easter.
No, we went every Sunday, and I think what really set such a great precedent for me in my faith is that I could see my father worshiping, and I could see him coming to Mass with us, and he tries to really kind of pin the major prayer warrior of the family on my mother. That she's really the one who's been praying for all the kids and really setting that example of faith. And that's very true to a certain extent. I know that my mother is a woman of prayer, but I also knew that my dad was a man of prayer. And to see that modeled in just him showing up to the liturgy, to have him show up to things at church, to see him volunteer in his parish community, that set a great example for me because it's kind of rare. It's rare to see now, and it was rare to see in the 90s, and it's not getting any better. Male leadership as a layman who is the father of a household, that's hard to find. And that was what really kind of convinced me that, being a Catholic, there was no other option for me. It's not like I was thinking about defecting from the faith. I was thinking about becoming evangelical. I was thinking about, other religions, other spiritualities. Everybody in my family was Catholic. And so it kind of made the decision to embrace the faith at a young age, really, from my confirmation, to really say to my family and, in my personal life, that I like being Catholic. And there's something comfortable about that consistency. And it was modeled by my parents. And they just made it so easy for me to say yes to something that the culture is really trying to rip people away from, saying that it's not going to make you happy. It's not going to be, a good career move for you, to embrace the faith. But to have parents that prayed and parents that I knew loved each other just set such a great example for me in discerning who the person of Jesus Christ is and how he's calling me to himself. It just made it a lot easier for me to embrace that call.
I mean, I think it's absolutely true in what you're saying as far as people underestimate the influence a father has, good and bad.
Yep.
A bad father makes it very hard for people to wrap their mind around a loving father who is God.
Yeah.
It makes it very hard for them. And a father who loves their child really does help somebody in their understanding of God. I was fortunate where I grew up. My dad is a tough guy. He's big, Italian guy. His hands look like loaves of bread.
Oh, yeah.
He was a boxer and just tough. And when it came time to protect us, I mean, look out. And it was actually to the point where, like, we were afraid to even say somebody did something sometimes. My dad would flip. But then he always had this, I would wake up in the morning often, and I would, go up to get something to eat, like early in the morning if I woke up early, and I would walk out and I would just see my dad often kneeling down by the couch with his Bible open, praying for all us. He would even take me to go plumbing. He was a plumber, and he taught me, like, when you get in his car, he showed me how he prays for the family before he goes off to work. But he had that great balance of, like, I had a fear for him. I knew he protected me. I always told people my dad was the number one person who would either introduce you to the Lord or send you to the Lord.
Right.
He had that thing. But you growing up with a father like that, and now you have this vocation, this calling to go be a father. And people, whether you're a priest or married, people have to realize, like, marriage is a vocation, and it's a vocation from God. It's not just vocation like, oh, I want to be intimate with somebody. You're called to be a priest of the home, to be a spiritual leader.
To be the spiritual head, I mean, that's such a responsibility. And, every time, I've ever done marriage prep or or even just, met with couples, they might have questions or there's this family crisis. I think sometimes married couples undervalue the way that they treat each other and what effect that has on their kids. And, you can say, I'm going to put my kids through the best schools. Maybe they're going to Catholic schools. I'm going to homeschool my kids. They're going to be involved in these activities. I'm going to shield them away from social media. All of those things can have really great effects on your kids. But what are they actually, what do they intuit about your relationship with your wife? What do they intuit about your value as a married couple? And if that's something that's wholesome and true and good, and it's based on something that's much more important than just the superficial, then kids take note of that. And I think that parents sometimes undervalue what effect their relationship has on their kids. They think that they can kind of just pass certain things past their kids, or that they can just, have kind of these little petty fights, behind closed doors, and that their kids won't notice. No, kids notice these things, and it almost becomes...
They remember.
And it almost becomes something that they can just receive, like, infused when they're just around some sort of dysfunction. And I tell you what, like, I think the world of my parents, and I think now as a 31-year-old man, I can look back and see about, when my parents were 31, and it's sometimes hard for me to even put myself in their shoes, because now I can look back and say, yeah, like, they made some kind of strange decisions. Like, why did they let us do that as a kid? Why did they, why didn't they make this a big deal? And you can see that, imperfect parents are raising imperfect children.
Yeah.
And yet we're all striving for perfection that we find in Jesus Christ. And, as an adult and looking back, I can see that, man, I love my parents for all of their imperfections, because now I can look back and I have no blame on them. I don't think that they should have done better. I don't think that, what they did was totally and utterly, bad for my formation. But I can see it kind of in a new light and see that they truly were doing the best that they possibly could. And God rewards that when you're able to make that daily sacrifice for your family. And it really starts with, the father being able to share that example, but to also, be the leader of his household and to be that shepherd of his small flock, his mini church.
Yeah. So you get the calling, you get the vocation. To you, you're saying it's something kind of like St. Paul talks about, like, woe to me if I don't preach the gospel. Like, this, to you, it wasn't something that you really were thinking about. You just felt like the call was really strong in you then?
Yeah, and I mean, just to kind of make this even more Dominican and Thomistic, it wasn't until I could really kind of look at just very simple questions that St. Thomas Aquinas would answer in the Summa that I could see that there was a great method to the madness of the Summa. That a lot of people, look at this great 5-volume work, in many publications, it's, 5 distinct books. And it can be very overwhelming. And yet it's simple in kind of a similar way that God is simple. It's not that he's just kind of like this guy that doesn't really have a lot to him, that he just like does one thing. He's simple in the way that he is pure goodness and he's pure love. And when we read the Summa, we can see that the motivation for this is always to bring us closer to that pure love. And there's a question in the Prima Secundae. It's question 3. And this is when St. Thomas Aquinas is talking about happiness. He's talking about man's last end. And he writes, is happiness something that can be found in wealth? Is it something that can be found in honor? Is it something that can be found in some sort of exterior good? And he eventually deduces this, and this is question 3, article 1. Man's last end is the uncreated good, namely God, who alone by his infinite goodness can perfectly satisfy man's will. Perfectly satisfy. And to think that we try to fill our life with all of these things that we think are going to make us happy is just a tiny piece of that eternal happiness that we will receive when we see God face to face. That he wants to give us something that is much greater and much more pure than anything that we can imagine. And I read this and I think, I want that. And there's something to this Thomistic theological view that sometimes we ask all the wrong questions when the answer is so simple, and that is that God is love. And I think that we need to kind of narrow into that answer rather than to just start there and then just make an excuse for everything about, why certain things happen in the world and how we're trying to, answer the world's problems by just saying, oh, well, God is love. Well, okay, yes, but there's something that's much more that's much more in depth, in seeing that God is simple, but he also can never be exhausted. And when we see that basic principle that he truly wants us to be happy by finding ourselves and losing ourselves in him, that's something I want. It's something married couples should want.
Yeah.
And so in any vocation, God is trying to bring us closer to himself so that we can be happy.
Yeah.
So basic. And yet we really get lost in the weeds when we think that God doesn't want us to be happy, when he's trying to, torture us, or, we think that he gives us crosses that we can't handle. We can handle it. And it's because he wants us to be happy.
I mean, it's that whole St. Augustine thing of our hearts are restless, O Lord, until they find rest in thee. I mean, you're made for God. In relationship with God is where we're going to find our happiness. One of the things that I hear, or I've heard, often, kind of a critique towards Catholicism is people say like, well, Catholics don't really believe or teach a relationship with Jesus. And I try to say like, listen, that's the furthest thing from the truth, because in Catholicism, like, our salvation is not based on, I said a prayer. My name was just written as soon as I said this prayer.
Yeah.
Our salvation is not just based on like this legal stance alone.
Right.
But it's based on like, the Catechism says like those who die in a state of friendship with God. It's like Matt Mayer, the Catholic, songwriter, righteousness is Christ in me. It's
right.
this living relationship with Christ. And even, I see you got a book about the virtues, even when you get into like the Stoics, and, Stoics would ask this question, like, is virtue enough to make you happy? But even for them, it was the idea of like, virtue is good. It's gonna, if you learn to control how you eat, it's, in the long run, it's gonna make you, better health makes you happier than just that spontaneous ice cream indulgence. Any of these, like, temperance or fortitude, all of those cardinal virtues do make you happy in this earth out of discipline. But I mean, Catholicism says yes to that, but then you just crank it up into this theological relationship with Jesus, with faith, hope, and love, where Christ is just living in us. That yoke that's on us, he's just carrying it. I mean, it's that adopted sonship.
Yeah, and it's also a friendship that we can never perfectly reciprocate. And so that's why even to call Jesus a friend, he's so much more than that. And, for anybody who thinks that Catholics don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ, or that we don't have a friendship, I mean, that's just cocoa, banana bread, boom, boom, nuts. I mean, but I think there's something that's a little bit, I can understand the critique. And I think that's because to the onlooker who maybe is not familiar with the rich tradition and the rich theological practice of Catholicism, they'll think that we get very cluttered and we don't have a very, we're not very smooth in really embracing that relationship with Jesus Christ, as if, the lives of the saints somehow take us away from the life of Christ, that, focusing on the virtues somehow clouds our judgment on how we are to serve the Lord in this particular moment. No, these are things that really make up really the crafty handiwork of God's work in our lives and how we are to serve him. And so to know God is to really know how he calls us to him. And, the reason I read about the virtues, and I find them so helpful in embracing a relationship with Christ, is that he calls us to take up our cross daily, and he calls us into a deeper relationship with him daily. It's not something that's just one and done. I've been chosen by Christ, and, he's going to do all the work from now on. He's calling us daily so that we can seek him and desire to receive his grace. And when we form those habitual good habits, those virtues, then it becomes much easier to receive something that God is already offering us, which is his life.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the Lord's Prayer breaks this down perfectly. Like, give us this day our daily bread. You think back in the Old Testament with the manna, if you collected I need enough for a month, the extra that you collected turned to maggots. And if you could see if God gave you all the health that you're ever going to need for 100 years and all the happiness and all of the money that you're ever going to need to where you had no dependency, how quickly would we actually abandon our relationship with Jesus?
That's like temptation, just, put up on level 11. It's just, if we were given pretty much everything, or even if we had the view and the mind of God where we could see exactly as God sees. I mean, he sees everything at once. If we saw our entire life at once, I'd be willing to bet it would be so overwhelming that we would get discouraged. We would see our hardships, we would see the crosses that the Lord has entrusted to us, and we would also see the ways in which the Lord is merciful to us and he keeps us from further crosses or further struggles. But to see just the overwhelming sacrifice and the overwhelming hardship, it's going to be hard for us to see the mercy. So when we're living our life, with Jesus Christ at the center, and we're taking on that daily cross, and we're asking ourselves daily how we are to serve him, we can see him working through our sacrifice. We can see him offering us in great merciful ways his help and his heavenly aid. And so, I mean, it's right and just that we ask him to give us this day our daily bread. We're not asking him to give us this day our day-old bread. It's not like we want to look back at everything that the Lord has given and we just kind of stay there. We have to constantly keep going. And that's what's so exciting about the Catholic faith, is that we don't believe in this whole one and done, I'm now a graced individual by the Father, and I don't really need to do anything else because God has done everything for us. No, it's that, and he doesn't want to keep you where you are. He wants you to desire him and to love him more and more, and that is something that we spend our entire life pursuing. We're never done until we meet him face to face.
Yeah, and he's trying to give us happiness, but what happens is we sometimes want him to give us happiness like he's just saying, oh, here it is. Oh, thanks. Now I got it. I'm good to go. But in reality, when he's even in the Lord's Prayer, he's saying, then we say, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And Jesus even talks about that in the Beatitudes, about loving your enemies, and blessed are those who are the peacemakers, and that could be interpreted to happy are those. And it's like Jesus saying, listen, what I'm trying to show you is how you get happiness. You forgive other people. You're dependent on God. You're in this relationship with God. You want to do his will on earth just as it is in heaven, and you're realizing God is altogether other, holy.
Right.
We're not. And I think that Catholicism really emphasizes the journey, not just the destination.
Yeah. No, that's a fair emphasis on really a main difference between looking at the life of Christ and your relationship with Christ, that daily friendship with Christ, as a journey rather than just like kind of the one and done, like here's the Jesus trading card and just keep this by your bedside and, he'll never change, you'll never change. It's like, no, you need to change. And that's part of the excitement of a journey with Christ in the Catholic Church, is because when we're asking the Lord to forgive us our sins, to pardon those who have trespassed against us, we can see that he's here with us even as our needs for him change, because the circumstances of our daily life are going to change as we age, as our kids grow older, as we become an old, withered California raisin priest. My needs for God's grace and his love for me are going to change, and I'm going to rely on him in ways that I probably, have never relied on him before. And again, I can't help but smile to think that itself is just an incredible gift. And it's not something to be wasted in failing to meditate on the immensity of this gift.
Do you feel that, so the difference between a Dominican priest versus a diocesan priest, one of the things is finances, correct?
That is a big thing, yes.
So why don't you explain that difference?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned this. I just did... I was at a funeral today, and I was at the gravesite, and the chaplain that runs the gravesite is a Baptist minister, and he's kind of looking me up and down. He's like, "So what's your deal? Are you Orthodox?
Are you in the KKK?"
Exactly, yeah. And I said, "Well, I'm a Catholic priest. I'm a Dominican." He's, "Oh, I've heard of the Dominicans. What makes you different?" And I said, and I kind of went right there. I talked about the evangelical counsels. We take 3 vows: poverty, chastity, and obedience. And he goes, "Oh, okay, you take a vow of poverty, but, it's really the Baptist ministers who live poverty. We've got kids. We have to handle our own finances. That gives you like a free pass to just kind of like let other people take care of your problems." And I'm just thinking like, that's kind of like a strange way to look at it, because the vows are a way to make us holier. And I think he is kind of right in a certain sense that the vows also protect us from the things of the world. And if we were to live this life of striving for a more perfect union with God by taking these vows and living a communal life and carrying out this task of preaching as Dominicans, we would be overwhelmed with, worrying about the things of this world. It would be very difficult to take on this task of being made holy, of being consecrated. And so, there are certain things that make us holy by embracing this life that are going to be very different from somebody who doesn't take these vows, but is perhaps living them in a different way, like as a married man or as somebody who, preaches the word in other ways and is maybe not a priest. But I think what distinguishes us very, very differently when it comes to finances is we don't call anything our own. And so it's not like we have, these personal bank accounts where we can kind of stow away all of the stipends that we receive from the diocese or from the, these preaching missions. We share all things in common, which can make people twitch a little bit because it sounds pretty socialist, and that's because it is. And I think that the only reason it works is because we have the common goal of being made holy. We're not trying to one-up each other. We're not trying to kind of take on these, individual ministries where we're trying to one-up the other friars in the house. We have the common corporate work of being made holy and making that holiness and inviting others to that holiness through our lives, through our vocations. So finances, that's like a very small piece, and I think people see that as something that's like difficult to embrace, but it's really not. It's my relationship with money is like pretty awesome, where like I don't have to worry about it in the same way that a Baptist minister would have to worry about finances. Yeah. And that, I don't be jealous. I'm really happy that I don't have to worry about money in the same way.
I have a friend who is going through school, and he's going to be a Baptist minister, but he's talking about, his goal is to go to Africa, and he's a real deal kind of young kid, real intelligent, and but he's single right now. But that is a thing though, like once as a minister, I grew up Protestant, so the ministers, that you have a family, you have to take care of. You have to plan ahead for a lot more. I could see a big, like St. Francis, like when he just detached himself, he just ripped the Band-Aid off.
Oh, yeah.
And detached himself from the material realm. But as far as like when somebody says, well, that's easy for you, like as a minister, like who's married and, we have that hard calling. I think that two things I want to read is I think Christianity misses this today in a lot of ways, but the New Testament really does emphasize that in the role of ministry, that celibacy is supposed to be, I think, the norm. It's not supposed to be necessarily like this really neat thing that some, like 1% of people do.
Exalted way of life.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be more of the norm. In Matthew 19, when Jesus was talking about divorce and how, you can only divorce your wife if it's a sexual, like it's an unlawful sexual relationship, kind of like King Herod with his brother Philip's wife Herodias.
Twisted
sister. Yeah. But his disciples know how radical Jesus' stance on in the permanency of marriage. And one of the things they say in Matthew 19, verse 10, his disciples said to him, if this is the case of a man with his wife, it is better not to marry. So the disciples are saying, like, Jesus, if you're going to be this strict, it's better not to marry. And you could think like Jesus said, listen, guys, no, it's not. I mean, you're thinking I'm too strict. But actually, Jesus, when he hears them say it's better not to marry, Jesus basically says, like, yeah, he answered, but not all can accept this word, but only those to whom that is granted. Some are incapable of marriage because they were born so. So in marriage in Catholicism, the marital act has to be done once at least for it to be considered valid. So there might be some men who cannot do that duty. So Jesus is saying some are born this way. And then he says, and then some because they were made so by others. So this would have been the time of the eunuchs, who were basically the bodyguards of like a
mutilated.
King. Yeah, mutilated. Which I don't think Jesus is encouraging that.
I don't think so either.
Origen was probably like, hey, it's a good idea. But then he says, because they were made so by others, some, though, are celibate because they have renounced marriage for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. And whoever can accept this ought to accept it. So Jesus is saying there are people who they renounce marriage for the sake of their ministry work in the kingdom. And Jesus is saying whoever can do this, if you have this gift, then you should do this. Then I'll paraphrase it in Corinthians, though. Paul in chapter 7 talking about, the virgins and the celibate, and he's basically saying, like, listen, if you're not a married man, if you're in the ministry, like, it's better for you not to be married. He says, like, I wish everybody was like I am. Paul was celibate. There's a reason Peter was married. He wrote 2 short letters. Paul's not married. He writes like 13 if you're including Hebrews. But Paul's saying that a married man is anxious about the things of his wife. I'm not a priest. I do a little podcast or have a little Bible study. I might teach CCD. But like even in my faith, like I got other stuff also I have to worry about. Things that it's not just all about me. I have to worry about my wife, her goals, her missions, my family. But Paul's saying, though, so a married man is anxious about the things of his wife. An unmarried man, though, is anxious about the things of the Lord. It's that freedom to focus on the Lord. So do you find this very beneficial in your call as a priest?
Oh, yeah. Where do I even start? The benefits of this, just, even that verse from Matthew. I think that I'm very visual, and I can imagine, for married couples, they have a lot on their plate, and then they go up for seconds, and they go up for thirds, and things pile up, and to be concerned with the things of the world, you're also concerned with the things, even good, holy things. You should be concerned about your children. You should be concerned about, making a just wage, providing for your family, and these themselves are things of this world. You're not going to have the relationship with your family in heaven like you do here on earth. You're not going to have to worry about a just wage in heaven like you are worrying about here on earth. So, the celibate man who's concerned with the things of God is more concerned about really the supernatural qualities within human, within our humanity, that we are called to be with Christ one day in heaven. But specifically, the priest spends his apostolic life being concerned with the supernatural qualities of those he encounters, even if he's only encountering them in prayer. Now, this might sound kind of weird or far-fetched or just some strange theory, but when I think about everything that I do as a Dominican, I'm praying for the people of God. I'm praying for their sanctification. I'm praying that the Lord can raise up good, holy families. I'm praying that people receive the sacraments and they receive God's grace. And all of this is leading to a person's face-to-face encounter with Christ in heaven. It's that I desire them to have that supernatural encounter with Christ. In a sense, the priesthood is about helping people die with the grace of the sacraments. Everything that the priest does is to encourage people to die with grace. And so that's a great concern because for a priest to be concerned with the things of God, with the things of the kingdom, with the things of heaven, we too are concerned with individuals, but we're much more concerned with the supernatural qualities of that individual rather than just the things of this world, how much that they earn, how much material need do they kind of exude, how can you help them materially? I want to help people supernaturally because I want people to have the beatific vision. I want them to see Christ face to face. And everything that I do as a priest is oriented towards that, whether it's prayers I say in the chapel, personal prayers, offering the Mass, or, conferring grace through the sacraments for others. It's helping people die with the grace of God.
How would you explain to us a little bit of your experiences, like maybe your first time consecrating the Eucharist, your first Mass, or like your first confession, like, what parts of these like stick out to you?
Okay. Well, the thing that really stuck out, for anybody who might not be completely familiar with, what happens after a priest's ordination, is typically the priest is very nervous because he knows that he has been given this free gift, and it didn't come without a lot of prayer and a lot of preparation and a lot of tension. And basically being shoved into a pressure cooker for years in order to kind of come out as somebody who has received the grace of ordination. But celebrating a first Mass, there's nothing else like it. If you ever get the opportunity to go to a first Mass of a newly ordained priest, because the oil is still fresh on their hands. They have the zeal of somebody who has essentially been kissed by the Holy Spirit to serve the people of God in this fresh, new, and authentically good way. And some of the first Masses can be very nerve-wracking. You can see a priest getting very nervous about saying the right words or doing the right thing. But what I can remember more than anything else was I was able to look back on my life without being distracted, but to have full appreciation for everything that the Lord has given me up until this point, and to know that it was all as a stepping stone to reach this point of celebrating the Eucharist, of being able to consecrate the bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. And I just remember that, which it wasn't just some feeling. It was just a great awareness of just how good God is. And there was just like a huge grace bomb where I knew God was calling me to be happy, and that I had made the right decision, and I was further inviting Him to invite me to the life of grace with Him as a priest. And it was a beautiful thing in celebrating my first Mass, and I would say many newly ordained priests have the same experience. It's like everything kind of converges at once, and you can see that it was all leading to this moment. And it's a feeling that's never gone away every time I've celebrated Mass. It's like, gosh, you are so good. Thank you for giving me this gift.
I used to always say with Father Lewis, you just saw his seriousness about the Mass. Like, I would joke around. I was like, dude, the way you clean
it's game time.
The chalice, like, it's like, I mean, he took his time. And if you wanted somebody to get in and out, like, he was not your guy. And if you're going there just for if you're going to Mass just because, well, this is my Sunday obligation, you're never going to like it. You know what I mean? You got to go there because you're going to have this encounter with Christ. But right. I always, the zeal of Father Lewis always stuck out to me. How about confession? You don't have to tell us what they said.
Well, I don't even remember, because, but okay. One thing I can speak about, though, because this is just about the sacrament itself, is that you have an encounter with those who are sincerely sorry for the ways that they've offended God. Like, that's what confession is. I think sometimes just the general consensus of the public is that confession is just a time where you just spill the beans and you tell all your secrets. And if only people knew how unexciting and really unremarkable confessions are, then they might not take themselves so seriously to think that a priest actually cares so deeply about the particular ways that they've offended the Lord. What the priest cares about is that they know that they've offended the Lord and that they want to get better. Yeah. And that itself is also very remarkable.
People probably think like, oh, wait till you hear this.
Yeah,
or they're gonna just punch me right through the screen. And there's probably nothing you haven't heard.
You hear so many things, from people, you're shaking hands after Mass, there's, I always try to take the opportunity, even in preaching, to invite people back to the sacraments and just to kind of give them that subtle nudge. Maybe it's been a while, but you're always going to, as long as you're truly contrite and, you're really seeking the grace of the sacrament, you're going to feel better. And it's more than just, getting something off your chest. It's knowing that the Lord cares for you much more than you can actually care for yourself. And when you bring your worries, when you bring the ways that you've offended the Lord to confession, you're always going to come out the other side of the confessional in that state of grace where the Lord is able to just really work in you in ways that He wasn't able to do. And you're putting up these huge blocks, because we do that. We put up a huge block and we basically say, I know that I'm a sinner, but I don't want what God wants to give me.
Yeah.
And that's just like, how offensive.
Confession really, even the act of driving to the church to go to confession.
Nerve-wracking.
But I think that the healing has already started to begin because, pride is where sin comes from. When you're making that action to go to somebody and to pour out your heart, like you're engaging in humility. This is why one of the names of it is the sacrament of conversion, which a lot of people don't realize, that's not one of the titles that we hear. We hear confession and penance and reconciliation, but like conversion's not like one of the names that we describe this as.
Yeah.
I do a lot of apologetics, and I really enjoy trying to show the truth of the Catholic faith through especially the scriptures. And to be able to, a lot of it's just misconceptions. But when it comes to confession, I feel like, man, give me 10 minutes and through the Bible alone, not even no church fathers, through the Bible alone, all show you how Jesus established confession. And you can do this, but it's kind of sometimes like I can really paint a picture and describe what the ocean looks like to you if you've never been there. But the fact of the matter is, unless you've actually been in the ocean, you're not going to get it. No matter how much I describe it, Bob Ross paints a painting of it. And with confession, it's kind of like, listen, I've been to confession. And if you haven't been to confession, then I know what it's like to go to confession. I know what it's like not to go to confession. Mm-hmm. So there's a certain aspect where it's like some of this stuff just can't come from the books. It can't just come from even our knowledge of Scripture. Some of it is actually just participation.
Yeah, and I think also we do a great disservice to the average Catholic of not being able to give them a straight answer of how often they should go to confession. The Catechism talks about receiving communion once a year during the Easter season. So, it's kind of just kind of assumed that somebody should go to confession at least once a year, and able to receive the Eucharist in a state of grace. But if we're not giving people kind of, a parameter of what that means to be in a state of grace, what it means to offend the Lord, how often you should really seek the sacrament, I always tell people you should go as often as you need. But that, let's talk about what your needs are. And it can't hurt to make kind of like almost like an appointment for confession. And you can say, every month, every 2 months, every 3 months, I am going to make an effort to get into the confessional. Put it in your calendar, put an alert, put it in your reminders app on your iPhone. But, if we don't hold ourselves accountable to even driving to the church and getting into the confessional, then we're not going to really take seriously the ways that the Lord takes us seriously in offering us his pardon and his forgiveness and his grace. We have to take the sacrament seriously and to know that it's always for our good. It's always leading to our happiness to be able to confess our sins and to admit the wrong that we've done so that the Lord can really set us right.
This is how I use this for myself. So like, when do I need to go to confession? And I admit sometimes we can make it so like, okay, here is a mortal sin. Mm-hmm. And if you did X, then you must go to confession, and it could be just such like a black and white thing where, gossip, we could think like, well, an affair, but gossip, but, if you're thinking to yourself, I can't stand this guy. And like, if somebody says to you like, hey, did you hear about Bill? No, what happened to him? Yeah, I guess him and his wife aren't getting along. Really? Now, before you go and check out if this is true, you're talking to somebody. Hey, did you hear about Bill? No, somebody told me him and his wife aren't getting along. Now, this is gossip. You might not have been in this intent to, like, destroy Bill. But, like, if you're like, you know what? Look at Bill and look at his wife, and they think they're so happy. You know what? And now you just start to spread a lie about, I heard Bill's having an affair.
Yeah.
Now, we could see, like, okay, it's the same sin, but in the way in which you're doing this, it's grave. This is not spontaneous. This is a thought out act. And I think that one of the warnings that God gives us, like, how do we know technically? Like, well, if I gossiped in point A, is it venial? But if I gossiped in the type B, is it mortal? I think one of the ways that God helps us to reveal to us, like, if like our relationship is really, terminal or if it's mortal, is when Paul talks about like the odor of the incense. I talk about like the confetti from a Super Bowl. I've been there where we're big Chiefs fans. If the Chiefs win and that confetti comes down red and yellow, that confetti is the greatest vision.
Yeah.
But when that confetti came out, red and black when we lost to the Buccaneers, that confetti is the most painful thing because you just know you're on the opposite side. Yeah. We share the name of Christ, just brings us joy because we share in his victory. Unless Paul says, though, we're not with him. Then it's a stench. If somebody brings up the name Jesus and you're living as a baptized Catholic and you're just like, oh, man, I don't want to talk about Jesus. I'm not really me and Jesus are on good terms. Or I don't, the name bothers you. I kind of think get to a confessional. Something's not right.
That's a big, flag on the field. But I think even something that might be a little bit spicy for this is, to just bring up something that Pope Francis said many years ago, and that is his concern for the American church that we're very obsessed with sins of the flesh, and going to confession just when we have committed mortal sins of the flesh. He's talking about sexual sins, and I don't have the right quote in front of me, but the more I thought about that and thinking, well, what's he getting at here? And the more I could kind of reflect on, in certain cultures, people will really take accountability for their sins, but they're almost like sins of different genres, of different modes. And in some cultures, they're much more sensitive to the ways that they've sinned against religion, that they've sinned against God by not treating him as a father, that they've sinned against the church by not going to church on Sunday. So, the average American Catholic knows that you're not supposed to do X, Y, and Z before marriage or, ever. But the average Catholic might not know that, we are deeply offending God when we miss Mass on Sundays, when we don't keep our Sunday obligation. We are deeply offending God when we curse his name, when we use his name in vain. And that's something that I think we have to understand as an American church, that in other cultures and other countries, there are other sins that might be much more, the people might have a greater awareness for those sins. And yet they all follow under this umbrella of offending the Lord. And there's so many ways that we can offend the Lord. And that's why, in its wisdom to believe that we have to go to confession as much as we need. I need confession more than the average person. I would be led to believe, and that's just because of my encounters with so many people and my encounters in kind of witnessing the brokenness of humanity. It makes me so aware of the ways that I need Christ and why I need that sacrament of confession. But I think if people are aware of their faults and aware of their habitual sins in a way that's not scrupulous and in a way that's not, getting weird, then they're going to want to seek the sacrament more than they're already seeking it. And that's again, always a good thing, to seek the grace of the sacrament.
You don't have to wait until, if you battle a headache for, a week and then it's a month and you usually don't get headaches,
Yeah.
You go to the doctor instead of you wait a year and you're like, doc, yeah, I'm blind. I'm blind. I can't hear.
I've had migraines for years.
Yeah, I have migraines for a year.
Why don't you say something?
So let's not wait until it gets into this really where, our sin and our desires turning and then, it's entering into the state of mortal sin where we're in the state of mortal sin. You don't have to wait until you're in mortal sin to go to confession. To talk about what you were talking about, Pope Francis. So I teach at my, Bible study. I know, we don't talk politics. I think it's a general consensus that most people, most Catholics, I think, and I have no way of knowing this, most Catholics that go to confession in America, I would probably say vote, they lean right. They vote red. But I'll hear sometimes people say, how could anybody be a Democrat and be a Catholic? I don't understand it. And obviously, I'm against the abortion. I'm against so much of this stuff. And I'm not a Democrat. But in one way I stick up for them is that here's the issue. I know really good Catholics that are Democrats. I know really good Catholics that are Republicans. The way we devise it is a Democratic Catholic in America who's very sincere in their faith longs for holiness. And so does the conservative longs for holiness. But what they do, and this is how we're just mentally understand things through red and blue, which that's not how the gospel is.
Right.
But a right-wing Catholic usually views and emphasizes holiness by avoiding sins of commission. Okay, what is holiness? Don't, support gay marriage. Don't have an abortion. Don't support pornography. Don't, do this. Don't do that. And then when you look at the blue Catholic, their view of holiness is more making sure that they're not falling into sins of omission. And they're more of like treat the immigrant good, which is a biblical concept, healthcare. And, our bishop's like, yeah, we're for the healthcare. You just, take out this abortion crap and, loving the neighbor as yourself. And this is how we wrestle. Well, which way is it? And it's like, it's not an either or.
That's a really, I've never heard it that way, to kind of infer about even just our political leanings and how we see the embracing of the gospel and even embracing our own faults and the sins of commission and omission. I will say this, that no matter whatever the political leaning, there has to be an assurance that Christ is working, and also he's not asking us to be divided. He's not asking us to try to assert dominance on the other. This is something that goes well beyond whatever we think is for the good of our state or for the good of our society. When we're concerned with things that are more of the supernatural quality, when we're not so, tied to the things of this world, then it can be easy for us to see that, to a certain extent, a lot of this has to do with our own preferences, and it has to do with our own kind of leanings of how we want to love the neighbor, how we want to, preach the gospel and evangelize. But whenever you take Christ out of the picture, whenever he just kind of becomes some sort of like auxiliary cause or auxiliary clickbait to our politics, that's where things get really dicey, and that makes it a big difference between somebody who has a good heart and somebody who has the heart that longs for the Sacred Heart of Christ.
Yeah.
And I think that that's sometimes a big pitfall for Catholics is to kind of almost like put politics before their own religious observance.
Or read it into the Bible. Like you could, sometimes it's easy for us to hear about taking care of the poor and this and that, and we could be like, oh, that's socialism. Mm-hmm. And I think some of these people would be shocked if they read Acts. And I think there's a truth in what Paul, I think it's in Thessalonians, where, this socialism thing was kind of, I don't think it's necessarily, I think it's somewhat descriptive more than prescriptive. It's because I think that in Paul's time, you realize, there were lazy people. And Paul has to say, if they don't work, they don't eat. But
you don't eat, yeah.
But as far as imagine how would we react if Pope Francis today said, listen, here's what we're doing as Catholics. Everybody bring what they have. You lay it down at my feet and the feet of the bishops, and we will distribute according to everyone's means. And if you lie to me, then you will die. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is what really happens with Peter. And I think that, why I'm not saying that was a prescript of this is how it has to happen. And I think Paul sees wrestlings with this, the system wasn't working. But sometimes we can be too hard on anybody promoting healthcare and taking care of the poor. And I'm I don't think that the New Testament was as laissez-faire capitalistic as people think.
We have to have a Christocentric view of everything we do in daily life, but especially when this kind of comes into politics. What do these things have to do with Christ? What do these things have to do with our embracing of his supernatural call to live in a graced life with him? And if we're able to bring Christ into the picture, then we're not gonna fail. We're not going to fail to be able to act in good conscience. But I think too frequently we take Christ out of the picture, and he again just kind of becomes this auxiliary, this auxiliary like thing that I'm trying to put something together here where people kind of misuse the name of Christ to try to prove a point or to avoid making a point. And Christ is never an obstacle. He's always the way and the truth and the life.
That's it. Amen. Well, with that, I think that was a good show. So I hope you guys liked listening to Father Frassati. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you don't, then Father Frassati will see you in the confessional, because that's mortal. It's mortal sin, mortal wound. I want to thank Father Frassati for coming on the show, and this music is blasting in my headphones right now. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you guys next time on the Catholic OCD Podcast.